Hi, Cinematic Enthuse here. It's May 17th, 2024, and I have watched a lot of movies since we last uh, talked. So let me jump into the earlier movies first, which are from, usually I try to group together the 1930s to the 1960s. So that's like the studio era. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk about like what I thought of these movies and I'll tell you later where you can find them. Okay, I just want to jump into this. So I was on a little bit of a kick with Joan Blondell. This is from the 1930s, and Melvin Douglas. And there was a movie called There's Always a Woman from 1938. Um, Sometimes you just have to ignore these titles because they're of the times. But basically, this is one of those murder mystery type things. And I think in this one, because I watched The Amazing Mr. Williams, which also starred these same two stars a year later, um, it was interesting to put those two back to back because in both movies, same co-stars, trying to what a lot of people believe replicate the Nick and Nora from the Thin Man series, which you could say that about a lot of people, you know. So Nick and Nora is kind of like a template for all the, great couple, male, female, or buddy kind of crime solving with witty banter, right? So anyway, these two guys together, ladies and gentlemen, of course, I think work really well together. What's interesting about both these films, There's Always a Woman and The Amazing Mr. Williams, is the first film is I think that's the one where she wants him to quit his kind of secure job with the police or with law enforcement and come do a private investigative agency on their own, like a small business, right? And he's reluctant to do that, and to say the least. And so throughout the whole movie, she's trying to, of course, sorry about spoiler alerts, but sometimes, it's not that big of a deal. You'll still enjoy the movie. She is kind of like encouraging him to get back into business and do their business together. And so throughout this movie, she's trying to solve the case. So she has more of like a what I love about the 30s and 40s, especially uh, in the Hollywood movies, is that there was plenty of occasions for women to kind of step up and really be empowered, despite there was, of course, the languages, like the titles, There's Always a Woman, I mean, they couldn't dare like title the movie, female tries to encourage her husband to get back into business, it just wouldn't have jibed. So anyway, it's a really cool movie. You should totally watch it. The Amazing Mr. Williams, also interesting, but kind of a reversal. um, she becomes, on the flip side, more of the deterrent to him pursuing his job. And I think he's like a DA or something like that, or an investigator or a detective type person. And she's always trying to get him to quit his job. So it's kind of like the exact opposite of the first movie, but it's still a very interesting, murder mystery, and very fun. Both of these are very fun movies. So I suggest doing them together if you can. So moving on, there's going to be a smattering of different kinds of movies. We're still in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s here. CoverGirl, 1944, Rita Hayworth and Gene Kelly. This is one of those movies that I remember seeing when I was in high school. I, as I mentioned in earlier videos, I started watching classic films when I was really young, like 9 or 10. But I also went through a phase in high school where I started watching a lot of musicals and um, some other classic films that weren't necessarily musicals or comedy either. But I remember watching CoverGirl back back during that time, and I was like, this is okay. I couldn't really get into it because it wasn't as maybe dynamic as the other musicals. And it's funny, sometimes when time passes and you watch a movie again, you can kind of see where you have changed your mind, or maybe you see it a little differently than you did earlier. I still feel like this movie isn't as it doesn't pop like a lot of other Gene Kelly movies, but it's got a lot of very enjoyable moments. So it's definitely worth watching. It's a really great story too, which I think I wasn't taking into account when I first saw it all those years ago. I think the story has kind of maybe resonated with me a little bit more now that I'm older, because it has to do with kind of like the woman pursuing her career and having that be kind of in uh, not pitted against, but well, sometimes pitted against a relationship with Gene Kelly, and those two things kind of tugging at war, which is the age old question for many women, right? But it's got some really great, like there's a song, Make Way for Tomorrow. And because it's a musical made during the wartime, that's especially poignant, I think anytime. That's a really great tune. And so, yeah, totally worth watching. And I recommend that. Head Over Heels is a British musical from 1937, which I had never seen before. There's a woman named Jessie Matthews who I'm not familiar with. This is the first movie I've ever seen of hers. It's it's interesting. British movies of that time are a little bit different than the American movies of that time. So I think for that alone, it's worth watching. She's wonderful in it. I think that the problem with the musical and the problem with the film in general is the two men that are with her, the actors portraying them, aren't quite on her level, quality wise. So it drags a little bit. But she's pretty fascinating to watch. So and listen, and she's got a lovely voice. So I think you should check it out. Glass Bottom Boat. I'm on a Doris Day kick, 1966. Believe it or not, I really don't know a lot of Doris Day films. I think the only ones I saw early on, years and years ago, was like Pillow Talk and The Man Who Knew Too Much. And I might have seen one more, and I can't remember the name of it. But those were the two main ones that I remembered seeing, a long a long time ago. This is a super fun movie, The Glass Bottom Boat. It's especially great I watched it on like a weekend evening. Really fun movie to end your evening with, because it's kind of a spy spoof, uh, and it's a lot of fun. And plus, it's got a really the neat thing about Doris Day is I really think I prefer her um, kind of career girl movies. I have been enjoying her movies that are more domestic as well, because she does bring a lot more empowerment, especially for that time period. I mean, especially if you compare her to some other people at that time period. Um, but I like the ones where she's single because I don't know, maybe they just appeal more to me. But this one's a lot of fun because she's got a relationship where I think her father she either works with her father, and he's got a boat. And so if you like boating, you'll get to see a lot of, neat boat, uh, you know, on location filming and stuff like that. And who is it? Um, I have brain farts sometimes. Forgive me. The guy from, he's very good looking. British. I think he's a British actor. I can't. Rod Taylor? No, sorry, I can't remember his name. Um, he's great in it. He's wonderful. So if you don't walk away with a huge crush on him after this movie, I uh, I didn't really watch a lot of the. He's the guy from the Time Machine, so you know who I'm talking about. And he was also in The Birds, so I can't remember his last name. Sorry. But I think I like him in this movie more because it's more of like the genre that I enjoy more. Um, So his character is very fun. Wise Girl, I had to re-look this up and remember what the heck it is that I watched, because this is one of those times where the movie was more memorable than the title. The title of this movie is like bizarre. I don't understand why it was called Wise Girl, but I think they could have thought of a better title. But this is a really, I think it's a very interesting movie. It's with Miriam Hopkins and Ray Milland. And if you've heard me talk before, you know that I love Ray Milland, especially in the 30s and 40s. I just think he's really charming. And I mean, I like him in the 50s too, but he's, a little more jaded in the 50s. And, his characters tend to be a little more jaded. But anyway, 30s and 40s characters of Ray Milland, I think, are a lot of fun. This is definitely one of those characters where he's a bohemian and he's raising, they're not his kids, but they're trying to remember if they're adopted or not. But anyway, he's trying to raise these two kids very uniquely, almost like homeschooling, and but in a very bohemian kind of lifestyle. And it kind of develops from there, where Miriam Hopkins is a kind of like a poor little rich girl. What I mean by that is there's a lot of movies from this time period where a rich character, somebody with a lot of money, decides to kind of, they would call it slumming now, but decide to go incognito and see what it's like to live on the other side. And there's a couple other circumstances that are involved, but this becomes a very interesting movie of social classes and also of alternative lifestyle in terms of, like, is the public school system always the best way for kids to learn? I mean, I have my own thoughts about that. I personally think public school system is pretty awesome, but I also can understand why, this character wants to enrich these kids' lives. And it's not really, it's still a romantic comedy, so it's not really, if you're not really into the whole kid part, it's okay. That the kids part is kind of a subplot. So it's really more about these two main characters, Marion Hopkins and Ray Milland. I would definitely recommend it. The thrill of it all, very fun movie. Young James Garner, how can you go wrong? Very much of its time. It's a Doris Day. I'm trying to remember if there's kids or not. Yes, there is kids. That's right. This is the one where she advertises and kind of gets into advertising by a fluke. I love the old man character who discovers her, basically. And it's not Harry Davenport, but it's somebody similar to him. If you like Harry Davenport, you'll love this guy, whoever he was. I can't remember his name. But it's mainly, Doris Day, James Garner, and there's some kids in it, but there's also a really wonderful balancing of, career versus domestic life issue. And, say what you will, maybe this isn't one of the most progressive movies out there, but I really enjoyed it, especially the parts where she's trying to sell the soap. And you'll understand that once you watch it. So definitely watch it. It's very good. Variety Girl, you'll find me choosing these, what I call, they're not musicals and they're not comedies. They're like reviews, revue, almost like they could be called a musical, but they're kind of like more of an excuse to bring together the acts of the day, especially musical acts, and kind of thread in a little bit of a backstory. This is one of those cases where I had no idea. This is from 1947. Variety Girl is the movie. And apparently you probably know this, but I didn't. There's a charity called, I'm not sure if it's called Variety Girl, but it's called Variety something. And it's basically been around since, I think, the 20s or 30s, but it's I think a children's charity. And apparently they have been doing, fundraisers like most charities do for a long time. And apparently some of this storyline is based on real life. So even though this is a musical review where you get to see a lot of different, like you get to see a lot of cool cameos, like different directors on the set, like having lunch and, you know, it's a lot of fun. But the girl apparently in real life, there was like a baby that was left in a movie theater with a note on it saying, I've heard you do a really good job with, you know, helping out, kind of like a Father Flanagan's type thing, helping out kids who need help. And she goes, I can't take care of this baby, so I hope that you will take care of her. Her name is, I don't remember her name, but long story short, this actually happened. And so some of the story is true. And then she grows up, you know, and then eventually what happens is the Hollywood producers that kind of sponsored her, or the charity that sponsored her, they end up somehow meeting up again, and she ends up getting mixed up with this other girl, and like like identity wise, and then they try and audition for a movie, and anyway, so it's a lot of like mistaken identity thing. But there's also some really funny on location. I don't mean like scenery location, which you'll hear me talk about in a minute, but like on location on the studio. Like you'll see really candid shots of, I think it was like Robert Preston and Bob Hope, and Bing Crosby's got a little scene with her. Um, there's a director named, is it Mitchell Leisen, who's, if you know Screwball Comedy, he's I think he's featured in it too. I can't remember the other man, but anyway, there's a lot of really oh, and there's also a very young Star Trek fans will know this name, DeForest Kelly. I had to kind of look twice and go, oh my God, is that DeForest Kelly? Because I knew he had a film career, but I just have never seen any of his films. So it was really fun to see him. And he's got a small part. So yeah, definitely watch that if you want a good time. Um, light plot, very light plot. But also, it's nice to know that this actually existed and still does. This charity actually still exists today. Because I looked it up on the internet. I was so fascinated. Okay, so in celebrating May birthdays, you'll have noticed I've been picking some Audrey Hepburn movies and some Katharine Hepburn movies, and there's a couple other May birthday old Hollywood actors that celebrate a birthday in May. But Pat and Mike from 1952 is with Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy. And I think I've only seen this movie like twice maybe, and they were spread apart, so I always kind of forget bits and pieces of it. But I really enjoyed this movie, seeing it again. I think this is one I might come back to periodically because there's a lot of good, because she's trying to train as an athlete, there's a lot of inner game. I'm sure you've heard of the inner game of tennis or the inner game of music. And I'm sure you've heard of stories about professional athletes having to work on mental, either visualization or positive thinking, especially in their as they're training for the next competition. But I think this is so helpful for anybody, you know. And some of the conversations between Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn are really, I think, even more fun than usual because he's in the position of coaching her versus being maybe a love interest, and that's it. So, yeah, and this has got Aldo Ray, who, if you've ever seen We're No Angels with Humphrey Bogart and Peter Ustinov and him, and that's a really lovely movie that I usually watch around Christmas time. You'll know Aldo Ray from that movie. You might have know him from other movies too. There's also a very young Charles Bronson. So look for him. You'll have to look twice and be like, oh yeah, I can see it in the face. Okay. You know, but I'm so used to seeing Charles Bronson, when he was probably in his 40s or 50s. And I didn't realize he had had such a long career before that. So So he's pretty fun. Great movie though. I think that's one of their best top, movies together, in my opinion. Shall We Dance 1937. Fred Astaire had a birthday in May. And of course, what's not to love about Fred Astaire? And I think if I have to think about what's my favorite Fred Astaire Ginger Rogers musical, I think this is the one I think of first, usually. Shall We Dance? Um, it's usually that and Top Hat, I usually put those together. Um, and I may put that on the schedule later. You'll hear me talk about Ginger Rogers. She's one of those people where she kind of annoys me as an actress. I'm not, there's certain sacred cows out there right now on the internet where you'll hear me say something not so nice about these people because I think they're overrated, and she's one of them. However, I think she's a wonderful dancer. I love watching her dance. I think she's just like amazing as a dancer. So I'll even watch movies with her as an actress if it's a movie that I either like the other person or I need to see the movie because I really want to see it. So I'll watch a movie with an actress or actor who kind of annoys me if there's something else about the movie that I really, or I've heard it's a good movie. There's still a few screwballs I haven't seen that have her in it that, I'll probably watch because, yeah. Anyway, you get my drift. Shall We Dance? I love it. Edward Everett Horton is wonderful. Eric Blore is in it with him. So those of you who love the two of them together, like I do, and of course, Edward Everett Horton is I guess you would call him Fred Astaire's boss in this movie, but um, he's always kind of poo-pooing Fred from going jazz when he should be doing ballet, and that's always a lot of fun because I love when both classical and jazz or classical and other mediums come together and kind of mishmash a little bit. I think it can make for a really fun movie. Sabrina, 1954. Audrey Hepburn, very famous movie, but not one that I've seen a ton of times. So I thought, it's Audrey Hepburn's birthday in May. I'm going to watch Sabrina. I haven't seen it in a while, and I remember liking it a lot. And yeah, I always get something different from this movie every time. And I think the thing that I got the most from her this time is I never realized until watching it this more recently, that I think the thing that I like the most, or maybe the top three things I like about Audrey Hepburn, is it's not just that she's graceful, okay, because she is. And of course, I looked up a little bit more of her history and found out that indeed she had trained to be a ballet dancer. Um, it's not just that; it's more than that. There's something about her facial features, and when she acts with a lot of the old Hollywood actors that I love emoted with their faces just as much as their voices. And I think there's something about like a dualistic innocence and sadness always at the same time. So when you see her, it's like I always feel like I'm seeing her both not just happy and sad at the same time, but capable of great innocence, but yet holding a space of sadness too. And I think when you put those two things together, it's really unique. I don't, I think there are other people who are maybe other performers in other areas, music or art or dance or whatever, who can do that. But I think that's maybe one of the appeals of her that I like. I think she's also a lot of fun. But I think there's always that there's a lot going on all the time when you look at her face, and not just I'm talking about when she's acting, um, and I'm sure that that's intentional, obviously. So I liked William Holden in this. In fact, I liked him more this time watching Sabrina than I did the first time for some reason. I know his character is despicable, but and of course, I go through this wave with Humphrey Bogart where I really love his stuff and I'll watch a few of his things. I know he's very beloved, so it's like, he's not as everybody knows Bogart, but I tend to focus more on the comedy stuff or the lighter stuff. I will occasionally watch a serious movie with him in it, but and he's always great. So yeah, major thumbs up. The Wild Affair, 1965 British comedy. To be honest, I'm gonna have to come back to this one because this is a weird example where I like Nancy Kwan, I like Terry Thomas. Terry Thomas is a British actor who kind of dominated British comedy in the 50s and 60s. But for some reason, I had a really hard time with this movie. It just, I don't know, it just seemed really kind of heavy to me. I just wasn't in the mood for it. But I was enjoying Nancy Kwan. Am I saying right? Yeah, Nancy Kwan. I was enjoying her performance quite a bit. So I might come back to this one. Um, it's interesting. Uh, but yeah, she had a birthday too in May. So it happened to Jane. This is a really cool movie. If you want to, first off, it's the only Doris Day Jack Lemmon movie together. 1959. This is Doris Day, Jack Lemmon, and Ernie Kovacs. Ernie Kovacs kind of plays a. I didn't figure this out until maybe about halfway through the movie, but the way his hair is and he's smoking the cigar, he kind of looks like Charles Foster Kane, the Orson Welles character. And so you kind of get that, maybe that's the vibe they were going for. But this is a wonderful David and Goliath story, especially good if you're wanting to watch a small business movie takes on the big corporations. And Jack Lemmon plays a lawyer, and Doris Day plays a small business owner, and it's kind of it's really more dedicated to what happens in her business. So it's really good in that respect. There is a love story, but it's very much on the side. It's not as prominent as the career. Funny Face, 1957. Another Audrey Hepburn classic with, of course, Fred Astaire, and they both have birthdays in May. This is such a beautiful movie. It's beautifully shot. Stanley Donen, who I adore, directed it. The music is with like one of my favorite composers of all time, George Gershwin, and Ira Gershwin, of course. And what's amazing about this movie is it's shot on location in Paris, and there's a lot of like, especially I guess you could call it a cathedral. It's a small church, basically. I always think of that small church scene where the swans are on the little river that's in front of the church, and that was so beautifully shot. So the cinematography is also really good. The colors are Technicolor, so a lot of the dance numbers. Stanley Donen is really great at like popping bright colors in front of you with these wonderful music sequences. And I think the performances are really good. It's an interesting story too. It's a similar story to Sabrina in that, she goes from kind of being a bland but very philosophical person into, becoming more chic and glamorous. But I think the ideas that she's talking about that are about empathy, I think are really interesting spiritually, and actually very topical, something that we need today as well. Even if the philosopher is, imaginary in the movie, it's still an interesting idea. Speaking of Humphrey Bogart, All Through the Night, 1942, I had never seen this movie. It was a first time movie. Wonderful movie with him and Peter Lorre and Frank McHugh. Frank McHugh is somebody who I like a lot because he's in a lot of comedies and musicals. Most famously, at least the first movie I think of Frank McHugh is Footlight Parade, which you heard me talk about at least a month or so ago. with Jimmy Cagney and Joan Blondell. And he tends to kind of play the kind of whiny, um, he just kind of plays a whiny guy, supporting character, but I think he's a lot of fun. And so he plays one of Humphrey Bogart's pals, and they're all in kind of like the book racket, like they're bookies basically, I think, or gamblers and stuff like that. But compared to some of the uh, nefarious types they come up against in this movie, they're practically saints compared to the really bad people. So this is definitely a really great movie to watch, especially now, given all the events going on in the world. I would highly recommend watching this if you want to watch a anti-Nazi movie that has some fun uh, comedy bits, which you would think wouldn't be able to be pulled off, but they pull it off really well in 1942. So big thumbs up for that. The Road to Utopia, Bob Hope and Bing Crosby. I had never seen this one before. I'm very new to the Road series, even though I grew up on, seeing kind of Road to homage movies like Spies Like Us with Chevy Chase and Dan Aykroyd, which I think even Bob Hope showed up in one of the scenes in 1985, which that's not on my list yet, but maybe down the road. But this Road to Utopia 1946 with Dorothy Lamour, I think she's in all of the Road movies with them, but she adds so much. I mean, they're great together, and I really like them together, especially during that time period. There's always the occasional in bad taste joke that they make, but I they kind of I think the amount of really fun jokes that are seem okay to me outweigh the ones that aren't as tasteful. And this one's a lot of fun if you want to kind of experience like a Alaskan getaway. It's got a lot of and it's got a lot of animals in it. There's like sled dogs and I want to say is there a wolf in it maybe, but I know there's a lot of like animals associated with the Arctic. There's a bear in it too. Like I'm pretty sure it looked like a real trained bear. Although I know they had, animatronics back then, but I thought, I also know that they would train actual animals to, be tame, and because there's even a couple screwball comedies with bears, and obviously the famous one, Bringing Up Baby, has an actual leopard in it. So yeah, this one's got a bear in it. So that's really, and it's a really funny scene actually. You'll know when you get to it. So yeah, definitely watch that one. The Moons Are Home. And you know what? This is what happens when you watch a lot of movies. Oh, I remember this one now. Okay. I almost forgot what it was. That kind of lines up with my opinion of it. It's not completely forgettable, but it's an excuse to watch Henry Fonda and Margaret Sullivan, who were actually married in real life. They both, really bizarre. This is in real life stuff. They both were born on the same day. They have the same birth date, okay, in real life. They were married in real life for, I don't know, 2 or 3 years maybe. And then after their divorce, they made this movie together. So things that you're seeing on screen are, kind of interesting when the couple, knew each other obviously very well. Beyond that, it's the problem with Margaret Sullivan is she's so talented, but I don't think the character of being this kind of bossy diva like person, I don't think it went well with her for some reason. And especially if you're used to seeing her in I mean, most of us know her from The Shop Around the Corner with Jimmy Stewart. It's just, some people just don't take to certain roles very well. It's interesting to watch. I like Henry Fonda sometimes in comedy, and other times not so much. I thought he did a good job in this one. I thought he was more relaxed in this one. So maybe it's because he knew her, um, and I'll talk about this someday, but I don't like him in The Lady Eve. I know everyone thinks he's great in it. I don't. I thought he was very uncomfortable with Barbara Stanwyck. I thought Barbara Stanwyck was amazing. Maybe I'll actually rewatch that again and talk about it. But I use that as kind of like a template of is this is this Henry Fonda comedy better than the performance I thought he did in The Lady Eve? And I would say yes. Is this a better movie than Lady Eve? No. So this thing called love. I like these Rosalind Russell career movies, and this is one of them. She made several of them, thank God. In 19 well, this one's from 1940, and it's with Melvin Douglas, and so you know I love Melvin Douglas. And it's definitely one of these, it's kind of reminiscent of what I was talking about with Doris Day and James Garner, where she has a career, he has a career, but they're both trying to get married, and but there's also something else going on with the with him trying to land a business deal with this client, and the client actually shows up at their house, and there's this really fun dinner party scene where he has to tell, basically the client wants is very fond of hiring people who are already invested in their own families, so he likes hearing about people having children, right? So in order to get on his good side, Melvin Douglas lies and tells his client, or his prospective client, oh yeah, my wife is pregnant, without telling Rosalind Russell. So there's this whole thing where like she doesn't know that they think she's pregnant, and that part is really funny. So overall, I think it's definitely worth watching. Um, but I love her in these career movies, even the ones that maybe aren't equally consistent throughout. This one's pretty good. For the Love of Mary. Why am I not remembering this one? It's always a bad sign when I don't remember. It's like when the title doesn't like jibe with the movie. I may have to come back to that one because I don't remember it. It wasn't that long ago. Forgive me. All right, Beat the Devil. Totally remember that film. Awesome film. Um, this is what started me thinking I want to find films to talk about with you guys that are shot on location, preferably a comedy. And those two things together sometimes are a lot harder than you would think. But this one definitely paid off. This is one I've never seen before, Beat the Devil, 1953. It was filmed in Italy, among a few other places, but that's a great thing in itself. It's black and white. It was directed by John Huston, and I think it's called a cult comedy now, which is interesting because, I mean, yeah, it's funny in parts, but it's kind of quirky more than it is funny. And but I think it's still lighthearted enough for you to have a good time. Some really interesting performances from Gina Lollobrigida. Let's see, who is Jennifer Jones, who I know she was really talented. She's a little too manic for me in this movie. I don't know if that was her thing or if that was just the character, the way she played it. It was just, I don't know. I mean, she was good, but there's something a little weird about it. Uh, Hilarious performances from Peter Lorre. He gets to say some really, really funny lines. And Robert Morley, who's a British actor who I think was taking the place of Sidney Greenstreet. So they tried to kind of, I think the whole thing is supposed to be a spoof on Maltese Falcon, which I guess it is. It didn't, I guess because it was in Italy, it felt, even though, you recognize the actors and you're like, okay, yeah, they were both on the Maltese Falcon together. It felt different to me in a good way. Maltese Falcon's a great movie. I just felt like this was a different movie than that. So if they were spoofing that, had they not told me, I would not have figured that out. I just would have thought, oh yeah, these are the same actors. So maybe more of an homage than a spoof, although sometimes those are similar. But if you watched on Tubi right now, the app Tubi, and I've put this, by the way, just a little break here, go to my linktree.com, www.linktr.ee/forward slash cinematic enthuse. And that's where you can find either my YouTube channel, my Instagram, and the Google Doc I have there, which has all of these movies and their links on it so that you can watch them on your own. And I usually tell you if they are on an app for free. And Tubi is one of the apps, TUBI, that has been doing, I think they're getting pretty good movies over there. This one is, if you watch it free on Tubi, it's restored in 4K, which I know is like high definition. So definitely worth doing. Adam's Rib, 1949. Definitely a template for the great he said, she said, battle of the sexes, especially in the courtroom between Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn. And I think I really like this one a lot. I hadn't seen it in like probably 30 years, and I loved it every minute. And I don't want to say much more than that because I just think you should watch. Oh, well, I do want to say that I did share this on my Instagram feed. There's a really cool clip of Katharine Hepburn talking about women's rights and how we don't want advantages. We just want the same things as men. You know what I mean? Like the same rights. And I thought that was a really good thing to still say in this day and age, 5 golden hours. This was my quest to keep finding on location comedies. This isn't really a comedy, although it's billed as one. It's more of like a crime con, kind of lighthearted con. So if you're into that, you'll probably see me choose more movies like that because sometimes they tend to be grouped into a comedy genre. It's filmed in Italy, so not all of it. Some of it's from the studio because it's a British film, but there were parts of it filmed in Italy, so that's cool. Sid Charisse, who we're used to seeing in dancing roles, is the lead, but Ernie Kovacs really is the star, and he gives a fabulous performance. So even if this isn't a great film, his performance is, wow, really, really amazing. So you should watch it just for him. George Sanders, unfortunately, only has a tiny part at the end, but he's there, and I always like him. So yeah, I mean, it's worth watching. Paris When It Sizzles, filmed in France. I could see, this is from 1964. I had never seen this movie before until now. It's with William Holden and Audrey Hepburn, and there's some really great on-location shots, which actually 64 might not be right. I think 1962 might be when it was. The reason I'm bringing this up is that I think it was filmed within a similar time frame as Charade, and because you'll see in the beginning of the film, you'll see a lot of the same location shots that were in Charade. Like I'm thinking right now that like Punch and Judy puppet theater that's in Charade with Cary Grant and Audrey Hepburn. That same theater comes up again in Paris When It Sizzles. So there's a lot of similarities between, like, not the storylines or the actors, with the exception of Audrey Hepburn, but really the shots, So I like this movie because it's a writing movie where she plays like a stenographer, transcriptionist, assistant, helping him. I guess maybe you call it not a ghostwriter, but somebody takes dictation, I guess. For William Holden, who's a famous screenwriter. So there's a lot of like inside Hollywood jokes, a lot of references to structure of films, which is kind of interesting from a writing aspect, like storylines and characters and what things have been done already in movies up to that point. And I think it's approached in a really fun way so that if you're into writing at all and or just enjoy, I enjoy a good writer's comedy. I don't know why. Maybe it's something I'm interested in. Brazil, 1944 is not the Brazil from 1985, which ironically is they took a couple songs in the Terry Gilliam movie from this 1944 movie, which was part of 1944's Brazil is your basic musical, okay? But it was part of that. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but this is something I've just been learning about, which is the United States back in the 40s had a good neighbor policy where they would like do a film that like featured cultural aspects of that country. Now they couldn't guarantee that like they were going to use actors from that country or that everything was going to be historically accurate, which it usually wasn't. But there would usually be some kind of at least there would at least be the minimum of maybe music that was literally from that country. So in this case, Brazil, which I think was shot mostly in a studio somewhere, but and the actors are the Latino actors are actually Mexican. Okay, fine. But they at least did get Ari Barroso, who I didn't know anything about until I watched this movie the other day. And he's the composer of the song Brazil. And so his music is really beautiful. And you'll get to hear a lot of his music in this movie. It's good. I like the guy. I can't remember his last name. Tito Guizar, and he is a was a Mexican actor who also was good enough to be in the Metropolitan Opera. I don't remember if he auditioned for the opera or if he, almost did or something like that. But he's got a really beautiful voice, and he's in it. And Edward Everett Horton, who I always love, plays his kind of like coach, uh, not benefactor, but more like the guy that's trying to get him to write this song so that they can get the prize money. So it's totally worth watching. Virginia, not Virginia Mayo. Is it Virginia Mayo? I might be getting my Virginias mixed up. She was totally unforgettable for me. The fact that I don't remember her last name is not a good sign. So at least I remembered Rod Taylor's last name. They could have gotten somebody better than her. She was not good in this movie. But luckily, Tito and Edward Everett Horton are amazing. And so if you want a fun musical with great music, totally watch it. Okay, this next one has two different titles. So sometimes you'll see it called Three Broadway Girls, and sometimes you'll see it called The Greeks Had a Word for Them, which also the censors changed because the original title was The Greeks Had a Word for It. And I think what they're referring to probably is like a woman of easy virtue, maybe. I'm guessing. 1932, so it's pre-code. So I'll just call it three Broadway Girls. 1932, Joan Blondell, Ina Claire, and I don't remember the other woman's name, but they're all great together. In fact, if there's one thing I could say about this movie, first of all, it's really short, so it's a lot of fun. It's one of these kind of like, they're kind of like the gold diggers, if you're familiar with the gold diggers of 1933 and 36 and 38, which those are musicals and those are great. I may get into those later. This was like a non-musical version of that. And but the scenes where the three of them are together are so spontaneous and fun in their spontaneity that it almost felt like, and I'm sure you've seen plenty of Woody Allen movies, but you know how Woody Allen characters, and I'm pretty sure he does this on purpose, when there's like a group of like 4 or 5 or 6 people, they tend to all be kind of overlapping each other in the way they talk to each other, like similar to like a conversation in real life. That's what I heard it with this, and that you don't always hear that from movies, especially in the 30s and 40s and 50s. You tend to just hear one person talking, another person talking, one person, you know what I mean? You just, so there was something very natural about the way that the three girls talk to each other. And in the beginning, it's a lot of fun and kind of goes on from there, and there's a lot of drama that happens, but it's still kind of a campy fun. It's not really an over the top hilarious comedy, but there's some moments of frivolity to it. So, and then I just watched these other two movies yesterday or in the last few days, because they're very short. Three Broadway Girls is like not barely an hour. Service for Ladies, it's like an hour, 10 minutes maybe. And that's the next one I was going to tell you about. Service for Ladies or Reserved for Ladies. Uh, this is a British film where I saw the American version because I couldn't find the British version. So I went ahead and put the American version on the sheet so that if you watch it, know that you're watching the American version, which I think is edited. So if you can find the British version, obviously watch that one. But this is Leslie Howard, who I know he's a lot like Humphrey Bogart in that he didn't make a lot of comedy movies, but the ones he did make are so wonderful. It's just so worth it to watch, whatever version of comedy that is. This is not really, this is more of a light drama, I guess. Certainly not melodrama. So you're not going to feel like you're watching something that intense. So it's very frivolous, but there's also a pretty intense love story. And I love the mistaken identity trope, they call it. I like to call, instead of trope, I prefer to use the word device because I think trope is always like kind of said in a pejorative, negative connotation, in my opinion. So I like the mistaken identity device that's used. And so there's train travel and there's, different scenery. And I don't want to say too much more because, and there is a social class. That the prevailing theme throughout the whole movie is about social class. So that theme comes up a lot in a lot of screwball comedy movies. But I think especially when you get the perspective of a British movie, it's an entirely different experience. So very much worth it to watch a British movie from the 1930s about social class. So for that, and it's pretty fun considering. So totally would watch that one. Greenwich Village, 1944, I'd call it a Carmen Miranda musical. It's got Don Amici in it, and they did several musicals together. And I love his voice. I love Carmen Miranda's voice. I think they're both amazing performers and actors and entertainers. And during this time period, I think they just did some fabulous work together. Vivian Blaine, apparently, this was her first film appearance in Greenwich Village. It's not, is it the top Carmen Miranda musical of all time? Maybe tier two, you know. But what was funny is it really kept my attention the whole time. It's not slow at all. It's the story is great. It's very interesting. Uh, the music is pretty good. If there's one thing I kind of would like a little bit less of is they played the theme like over and over and it's actually a song I really like. And even I got tired of it. I was like, okay, can we not hear this one more time? And I love musicals, so it's a lot if I was getting tired of it. And I absolutely adore musicals. So yeah, and it was a song I like a lot. You might recognize it. It's a song called Whispering. I actually heard this song called Whispering through Les Paul and Mary Ford, different group of people from this movie. But I'm sure some of you might know. Well, you know who Les Paul is because he named the great rock guitar is named after it. He invented it. So, but anyway, in the 50s, he and Mary Ford did a version of Whispering that was really good. But back to this, Don Amici is really fun. He plays a composer in it. So that's an unusual title to have, I think, in general. And he's composing a concerto in it, and that's certainly unusual to have in Hollywood films. I think there's maybe a handful of movies that have that idea. And he's kind of thrust into the world of Greenwich Village of the 20s. So it is a period film. It was a movie made in 1944 about 19, I think the placard in the beginning, I think said 1922. So if you want some kind of 20s, there's a lot of the, Prohibition era stuff in there, some jokes about that. So I like movies that do that era as well as the 30s. But I think it's always interesting to watch a movie that was made in the classic era about a time that came before when it's being made. And there's quite a few movies that where they did that. So um, yeah. So thank you for sticking with me. I think maybe what I'll do is end here. And what I'll do is I have a whole nother set of 1970s, 80s, and 90s and 2000s movies that I watched. But I think I'm going to make a separate video for those because if this is getting kind of long. So, and, this is my day off. So, stay tuned for some of the movies I'm going to talk about if I have enough energy to do it today, I'll do it today. Maybe later on today, I'll do it. I'm not sure. But some of the movies I'm going to talk about that are more from the 80s, 90s, and 2000s are Who's Harry Crumb, Black Sheep, Tommy Boy, Revenge of Pink Panther, School of Rock, Waiting for Guffman, Dodgeball, Return of the Pink Panther, The Tourist, and Murder by Death. And there's a couple more I didn't mention there. But so that's more of for those of you I know there's a lot of people who like the broad variety, but I know there's also people who tend to just like the 30s to the 50s or 60s. And then there's other people who just like the 70s and 80s and 90s and 2000s stuff. So maybe it's a good idea to separate these two. Please, if you're listening to this on YouTube, check out my Instagram, Cinematic Enthuse. I'm posting there pretty regularly lately, knock on wood. And what I do is I post, like, here's what I'm watching, and I maybe put a little bit of background music that's applicable to that film or that I maybe think would go nicely with that film. Sometimes it's just an idea I have. And I'll give you the link, because you just go to my linktree, and which is in the bio of my Instagram. I think it's also on my YouTube too. And just click on the link. It brings up a nice big Google Doc for you. And you can either, at the top of the document, there's instructions. Basically, you can either find and, search for the term you're looking for, just hit Control F, or, the three dots in the right-hand corner, and it will come up and say, find and replace. There's a little box that comes up and you just type in, all through the night, I'm looking for that, or funny face, and it'll take you to the document, to the place in the document that has those terms, and there'll be a little link there. Most of the time I try to do either YouTube links, Internet Archive links, which are completely compatible with pretty much everybody's computer, at least from what I've heard. I know YouTube is. Occasionally, where I have to, I'll do what they call .ru, which is you might have some virus. It's not something where you're going to get a virus from it. It's more like your computer might have like a pop-up blocker or something where I've had people in the past say they've had trouble with .ru. So maybe use if you can use a mobile device over a computer for that or something like that. But I usually clarify in there .ru, so, and those are kind of not, that's only if I've exhausted every other possibility and I can't find it anywhere else. So my first choices are always YouTube and Internet Archive, which are completely safe. Okay. So, at least as of the moment of this recording. So anyway, so that's why I'm trying to find stuff that's accessible to everybody. The other exception is, and I forgot to mention this again, I did mention it earlier, Sometimes I might say you can find something on Hoopla. If you're not familiar with Hoopla, it's totally accessible through your library card. So all you have to do is have your library card hooked up to Hoopla, Hoopla. It's an app, it's free. It hooks up with your library card. They have a whole database of obviously books and audiobooks, but movies and music too. So that's another possibility. If I find other, sometimes I might put Peacock or Pluto TV or um, Tubi, and if it's only on Amazon or Netflix, I might say that too. But I'm trying to not use the Amazon and Netflix in this document because I know not everybody has access to that. Whereas a lot of these other things, almost anybody who has a device and internet connection has access to these apps for the most part. Okay. So I'm glad I got that done at the end. And I look forward to talking to you again. And as always, you can always send me a message, comment at Instagram. Obviously, I'm on YouTube too, but I tend to hang out more on Instagram. And if you ever have any suggestions, I love screwball comedy. I love musicals. I also love on location stuff. So I'm probably going to keep trying to find kind of vacation-y kind of movies or heist movies but I try to stay away from super intense stuff right now, mostly for my own mental health and also for just because I do this to relax and I want it to be fun. So um, if that's what you're looking for and you love classic movies or you even love, sometimes I'll do 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000 movies, that are really fun too. So, okay. I hope you have a wonderful weekend and I'll hope to make that second video. I can't guarantee when it's going to happen, but it'll happen soon. Okay. Talk to you soon.